Some people burn their bridges. My sister used dynamite. Standing before hundreds of Chicago's most powerful people, she snatched the microphone to announce she was pregnant with my husband's baby. She expected me to shatter into a million pieces. But narcissists forget one crucial rule of survival. Never corner a woman who has spent 5 months gathering undeniable proof. You have no idea what is waiting for you in the dark. Hello, listeners of Haley Revenge Stories. I want to start by offering a sincere and polite welcome to all of you, and I truly appreciate you tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube recently turned off the monetization feature for our channel, which means we no longer have an operating budget to keep things running. If you find today's story engaging and entertaining, please consider supporting us with a donation of just $1 so our team can cover their daily living expenses and continue creating the high-quality stories you love to hear. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code displayed on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment of this video, and we thank you so much for your generosity. My name is Hannah Moore. I am 34 years old, and I always believed that if you built a life with enough precision, it would stand strong against any storm. As the director of architectural design at AuraCore Innovations, a firm that was rapidly climbing the ranks and reshaping the Chicago skyline, I made a living out of structural integrity. I understood strong foundations, load-bearing walls, and the exact breaking point of heavy materials. But I was about to learn that human betrayal has no architectural blueprint. The setting for my personal demolition was the Gold Coast Room at the Drake Hotel in downtown Chicago. It was our annual charity gala, an event I had meticulously orchestrated down to the very last silk napkin. Hundreds of the city's most influential business moguls, wealthy socialites, and powerful politicians filled the grand ballroom. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft, sophisticated hum of classical string music playing in the background. Standing perfectly by my side, slipping his hand possessively around my waist, was Liam, my husband. To the outside world, Liam was the ultimate prize. He was devastatingly handsome, charismatic, and played the role of the perfect, adoring gentleman so well that he could have fooled anyone. We were the ultimate power couple, the absolute envy of everyone in the room. The night was hitting its absolute peak. Waiters in crisp white gloves were circulating with silver trays of expensive champagne, and I had just finished shaking hands with a major investor for my firm. Everything was flawless. And then, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence was jarring, cutting through the ambient noise of the party like a sharp blade. I turned my attention toward the main stage, expecting the hired master of ceremonies to announce the final auction items for the charity. Instead, I saw a familiar flash of crimson silk. It was Chloe, my own flesh and blood, my younger sister. She strutted up the carpeted stairs to the podium, her high heels clicking loudly and aggressively against the wood. The master of ceremonies, an older gentleman who looked utterly bewildered by the interruption, tried to gently guide her away. But Chloe snatched the microphone from his hand with a violent, practiced motion. She adjusted the heavy metal stand, her lips curving into a slow, challenging smirk that I had known since we were children. It was the exact face she made right before she broke my favorite toys. But this time, the toy she wanted to break was my entire life. She tapped the microphone twice. The sharp thud echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. Every single eye in the cavernous room locked onto her. "Good evening, everyone," Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, amplified for hundreds of ears to catch every single syllable. "I know we are all here to celebrate my brilliant, hard-working sister Hannah. But since we are surrounded by family and close friends, I thought this would be the absolute perfect time to share some wonderful news." She paused, letting the heavy suspense hang in the air. She locked her eyes directly with mine from across the room. Her smirk widened into a triumphant, venomous grin. "I am pregnant with Liam's baby," she announced loudly, her words ringing out like gunshots over the sound system. "Hannah, I think it is time you finally accept the truth and step aside. He loves me now." For 2 agonizing seconds, the massive Gold Coast room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, the sparkling illusion of high society shattered completely. Somewhere near the front tables, a delicate crystal wine glass slipped from a guest's hand and smashed into pieces against the marble floor. That sharp crack broke the spell. A tidal wave of frantic, shocked murmurs erupted across the entire ballroom. People gasped, whispering behind their hands. I slowly turned my head to look at my husband. Liam was frozen stiff. His skin had turned as stark white as a freshly bleached bedsheet. The charming, arrogant facade he wore so effortlessly every day had completely melted away, leaving only the terrified, wide-eyed expression of a cornered animal. Up on the stage, Chloe looked like a conquering queen, soaking in the gasps and the scandalized stares, absolutely drunk on her own public victory. She expected me to scream. She expected me to lunge at her, to fall to my knees in front of everyone, or to run out of the Drake Hotel with tears ruining my expensive makeup. She wanted the ultimate satisfaction of watching the strong, perfect Hannah Moore finally crumble into a pathetic, broken mess. But as I stood there, bathed in the horrified stares of Chicago's elite, my heart did not race. My hands did not shake. My eyes remained completely dry. I did not cry, and I certainly did not collapse. Why would I? You only panic when you are caught off guard. Chloe and Liam thought they had completely blindsided me, entirely unaware that I had spent the last 5 months preparing for this exact, highly publicized moment. I let the chaos swirl around me, my face an unreadable mask of absolute chilling calm. Because right then, on the opposite side of the ballroom, the man sitting perfectly still in the darkest, most obscure corner of the room was preparing to stand up. And he was about to bring the truth to the light. To understand how we arrived at this exact second of public humiliation, you have to rewind the clock. You have to look past the sparkling chandeliers of the city and travel 30 miles north to the quiet, manicured lawns of Lake Bluff, Illinois. That was where the roots of this particular poison first took hold in the soil of our childhood. Growing up, I was the designated fixer. My parents painted a picture of a flawless suburban family, but behind closed doors, I was the one constantly smoothing over the rough edges. I was the responsible older sister who made sure the doors were locked and the homework was done. Chloe, on the other hand, was a walking tornado. She was impulsive, reckless, and practically allergic to consequences. When she dropped out of college halfway through her freshman year, my parents simply sighed and blamed the school system. When she wrecked her car after a wild party, they bought her a new one. And I was always there, sweeping up the glass, paying off her debts with my early paychecks, and pretending everything was fine. But Chloe's problem was never just a lack of discipline. It was something much deeper, a dark, gnawing hunger that could never be satisfied. I realized early on that Chloe did not simply want nice things. If you gave her a brand new toy, she would toss it aside within 5 minutes. But if she saw me playing with a broken, hand-me-down doll, she would fight me tooth and nail to take it away. Her entire sense of self-worth was directly tied to stripping away mine. She did not want a successful career or a happy life of her own. She specifically wanted the life I had worked so hard to build. Her jealousy was a quiet, suffocating shadow that followed me everywhere. I should have known better than to bring Liam into that toxic dynamic. I vividly remember the day I introduced him to the family. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon, almost 5 years ago. Liam was charming, polite, and completely unaware of the minefield he was walking into. From the moment he stepped through my parents' front door, Chloe latched onto him like a parasite. She laughed a little too loudly at all his jokes, touched his arm a little too frequently, and constantly complimented his clothes. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself she was just trying to be the welcoming, affectionate younger sister. I convinced myself that her endless praise was just harmless flattery, disguised perfectly under the innocent cover of a sister-in-law adoring her new brother-in-law. The facade began to crack exactly 1 year ago. The warning signs were subtle at first, just tiny tremors before the earthquake. It started with the cologne. For 6 years, Liam had worn the exact same woodsy scent I bought him for our first anniversary. Then, suddenly, he smelled different. It was sharper, sweeter, something you would buy at a trendy boutique rather than a classic department store. When I asked him about it, he gave a quick, dismissive wave and mumbled an excuse about wanting a change. Then came the finances. As an architect, I am meticulous with numbers. I started noticing strange, unexplained cash withdrawals from our joint checking account. $200 here, $500 there. Small enough to fly under the radar, but consistent enough to form a pattern. The true turning point, however, was our family Thanksgiving dinner last November. The dining room was packed with relatives. The turkey was perfectly roasted, and everyone was deep in conversation. But my eyes were drawn to the far end of the table. Liam and Chloe were sitting diagonally from each other. For a fleeting second, the noise of the room faded away, and I caught the look passing between them. It was not a friendly glance. It was heavy, familiar, and dripping with an undeniable, sickening intimacy. It was the look of two people who shared a secret they thought no one else knew. My suspicions hardened into absolute certainty on a random Tuesday in early spring. My afternoon meetings had been canceled, so I drove home around 2 o'clock, completely unannounced. The house was dead quiet. Liam had told me that morning he was working from home, spending the entire day alone in his study drafting marketing proposals. But when I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water, my stomach dropped. Resting on the marble island, right next to Liam's laptop, was a ceramic coffee mug. Smeared perfectly along the rim was a distinct, bright coral lipstick stain. It was a custom shade. I knew exactly what brand it was and who wore it, because I had bought that exact lipstick for Chloe as a birthday gift just 3 months prior. I picked up the mug. The porcelain was still slightly warm. I stood alone in my immaculate kitchen, the air suddenly thick and suffocating. The ultimate betrayal was staring me right in the face. My husband and my sister. Most women in that situation would have completely lost their minds. They would have thrown the coffee mug against the wall, stormed into the study, and screamed until their throats bled. They would have demanded answers, cried, and begged for an explanation. I did none of those things. I carefully washed the mug, dried it, and placed it back in the cupboard. I walked out the front door, got back into my car, and drove away. I did not want an emotional confrontation filled with cheap lies and pathetic apologies. I wanted pure, undeniable leverage. I pulled my car over, took out my phone, and searched for the most ruthless private investigator in the city. The game had officially changed, and I was going to make sure I was the one writing the rules. I needed a professional who operated entirely in the shadows. Enter Marcus Vance. He was a former police detective who had traded his shiny government badge for the lucrative, cynical world of private investigation. Marcus was a man of startlingly few words, communicating mostly through sharp nods, low grunts, and thick manila envelopes. He possessed the cold, unfeeling eyes of a man who had seen the absolute worst of human nature and was no longer surprised by any of it. We held our first meeting at a rundown, neon-lit diner on the industrial edge of the city, a place where nobody from my pristine social circle would ever dare to set foot. I slid my initial retainer fee across the sticky, syrup-stained table. It was $10,000 in crisp, untraceable bills. He took the envelope without blinking, asked for their full names, their daily schedules, and their license plate numbers. Then, he simply stood up and told me he would be in touch. The waiting was a masterclass in psychological torture, but I treated it exactly like one of my massive architectural projects. I compartmentalized. By day, I was the brilliant director, drafting structural blueprints and leading board meetings. By night, I was a ghost haunting my own life. Less than 72 hours after my diner meeting with Marcus, the first delivery arrived at my corner office at Auricor Innovations. My young assistant dropped the heavy package onto my sleek glass desk, entirely unaware of the radioactive material resting inside. I waited until the entire floor went to lunch, locked my heavy mahogany door, and broke the wax seal. Out spilled dozens of glossy, high-resolution photographs. I stared down at Liam, my polished, sophisticated custom suit-wearing husband, sneaking out of dingy $40-a-night motels in the far western suburbs. The images captured Chloe wearing oversized dark sunglasses, pulling her trench coat tight, and rushing nervously into a room with peeling brown paint on the door. It was all so incredibly cheap. The sheer indignity of the visual evidence almost made me laugh out loud in my empty office. They were risking my entire empire, our entire shared history, for a stained mattress off the interstate highway. But the visual proof was absolutely nothing compared to the audio. A week into the intense surveillance operation, Marcus managed to plant a tiny, long-range listening device near their table while they were having lunch at an outdoor cafe. He sent me the heavily encrypted digital file on a Tuesday afternoon. I locked my office door again, plugged in my noise-canceling earphones, and stared blankly at the digital model of a new commercial skyscraper on my computer monitor. Through the slight static of the recording, I heard the undeniable, sickeningly familiar pitch of my younger sister's voice. "I want to see her lose everything," Chloe whispered. The pure, unadulterated malice vibrating through the audio file made my blood run freezing cold. "She does not deserve you, and she sure as hell does not deserve that fancy director chair. She thinks she is so perfect. I want to break her." That exact, venomous sentence violently altered my internal chemistry. In the span of 3 seconds, any lingering, pathetic shred of heartbreak I felt as a betrayed wife instantly evaporated. It was completely burned away, replaced by a freezing, highly calculated, and absolute focus. This was never a tragic, accidental romance. This was not a story of two helpless souls falling uncontrollably in love against their will. This was a hostile, premeditated takeover. Chloe did not just want to sleep with my husband in cheap motels. She wanted to wear my skin. She wanted to systematically tear down the beautiful architecture of my life and stand triumphantly in the smoking ruins. Once I realized I was fighting a brutal war for my own identity and my fundamental self-worth, the rules of engagement permanently shifted. I stopped being a weeping victim. I became the architect of their destruction. I immediately instructed Marcus to dig much deeper, shifting our primary focus from their dirty motel bedsheets to the cold, hard financial numbers. As someone who builds skyscrapers, I know that math never lies. We spent the next 3 months meticulously tearing apart Liam's entire financial history. He thought he was being incredibly clever by opening a secret, paperless credit card under a different mailing address. But he made the fatal, arrogant mistake of paying the minimum monthly balances from our shared emergency savings account. Marcus tracked every single dime with ruthless efficiency. We documented $800 spent at a luxury boutique for a designer handbag. Then we found a receipt for $2,500 for a diamond pendant necklace. It was the exact same necklace I later saw Chloe wearing to our mother's Sunday brunch, flaunting it right in front of my face. Liam was actively funding his pathetic midlife fantasy using the money I had earned designing high-rises. Every single fraudulent transaction was printed, highlighted in neon yellow, and filed away into my rapidly growing legal arsenal. But Marcus Vance proved he was worth every single penny of his exorbitant fee based on what he discovered during week 12 of the investigation. He called me on my secure line late one evening. His usually flat voice carried a rare edge of urgency. He refused to discuss the details over the phone and demanded I come to his basement office immediately. When I arrived, he did not hand me another brown envelope. Instead, he simply turned his heavy laptop screen toward me and pointed to a series of highly confidential documents and surveillance photos he had intercepted. It was a secret so profound, so devastatingly twisted, that it completely rewrote the entire narrative of their sick affair. While Liam was busy betraying me, Chloe was busy betraying absolutely everyone. Marcus had accidentally stumbled upon her secondary, completely separate layer of deception. It was a lie so massive and so destructive that even my cheating husband was entirely clueless about its existence. I stood perfectly still, staring at the glowing computer screen for a full 10 minutes, silently absorbing the sheer magnitude of the weapon Marcus had just handed me. I looked up at the grizzled detective and smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying, and bloodless smile. I calmly told him to digitize every single piece of that new evidence and lock the physical copies in his fireproof safe. I knew instantly that this specific file was not going to be used for a quiet, dignified divorce settlement in a dusty courtroom. This was the nuclear code, and I was going to save it to detonate in front of the entire city on the most important night of the year. The echo of Chloe's announcement faded, leaving a suffocating vacuum in the Gold Coast room. Hundreds of eyes darted between the three of us, desperately trying to process the social explosion that had just detonated. The paralysis finally broke. Liam, the man who had spent 2 full hours getting his hair styled perfectly for this evening, suddenly looked like a drowning man thrashing in the ocean. He scrambled forward, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the marble floor. He lunged at the stairs, tripping over the bottom step, completely destroying his carefully curated image of a sophisticated gentleman. He scrambled up, his face covered in a thick layer of cold sweat. "Chloe, stop it. Give me that microphone right now," he hissed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. He reached for the metal stand, his hands trembling so violently he could barely keep them open. Chloe, utterly intoxicated by her own dramatic performance and entirely convinced she was the hero of this twisted story, yanked the heavy stand away from him. "No, Liam, tell them we are deeply in love and you are finally leaving her," she shrieked, her voice echoing painfully through the speakers. She was entirely unaware of how pathetic they both looked, grappling like 2 angry toddlers on a brightly lit stage in front of the city elite. "It is not true. She is crazy. I have absolutely no idea what she is talking about," Liam stammered, turning his sweat-drenched face toward the crowd. He was desperately trying to salvage his business reputation, trying to flash that charming smile that had closed so many deals. But the desperate, guilty tremor in his voice gave him away immediately. He looked like a cornered rat. I decided it was time to end their embarrassing little wrestling match. I smoothed down the front of my emerald green evening gown, adjusted my diamond earrings, and took my very first step forward. The crowd instinctively parted for me like the Red Sea. I heard the sharp intakes of breath from the women standing near the aisle. They fully expected a weeping, devastated wife. They expected a woman whose entire universe had just collapsed into dust, someone who would run out the double doors in tears. Instead, they watched a predator calmly, methodically approaching her prey. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression carved from solid ice. Not a single tear stained my cheeks. My breathing was slow, deep, and measured. Every click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a judge bringing down a gavel. When I reached the top of the softly lit stairs, Liam practically recoiled from me, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. Chloe stood her ground, clutching her stomach defensively, trying to force her arrogant smirk to stay permanently fixed on her face, but I could see the rapid, fluttering pulse of sheer panic in her neck. I stepped smoothly between them, reaching out and taking firm hold of the microphone. I did not yell. I did not let my voice waver even a fraction of an inch. I looked directly into the vast sea of shocked, breathless faces, holding the suffocating silence until the entire room was hanging onto my every single breath. "Thank you, sister," I said, my voice echoing smoothly through the massive speakers, carrying a soft, chilling, and deadly politeness, "for bravely speaking the truth tonight, but you left out a few critical details." Before Chloe could even open her mouth to utter a response, I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, single nod toward the darkest area at the back of the ballroom. All heads snapped backward in perfect unison. From the shadowy corner near the heavy wooden service doors, Marcus Vance slowly stood up. In a glittering sea of $10,000 silk dresses and custom-tailored velvet tuxedos, Marcus looked completely alien in his wrinkled dark gray detective suit. But the heavy, unblinking intensity in his eyes made the wealthiest, most powerful men in Chicago step back quickly to let him pass. He carried a thick black laptop clamped tightly under his left arm. He marched straight down the center aisle, completely ignoring the frantic whispering around him. He climbed the stage stairs with heavy, deliberate footsteps and walked past my trembling husband without even throwing him a single glance. Marcus walked straight over to the expensive, highly complicated audiovisual console set up for the charity auction. He slammed his heavy laptop onto the fragile table, grabbed the main video output cable from the terrified technician, and plugged it directly into his machine. The giant 20-foot-high projector screen that hung directly above the stage flickered wildly for a split second. The elegant charity logo abruptly vanished into total blackness. In that exact fraction of a second, the entire power dynamic in the room completely inverted. Chloe's triumphant, arrogant grin finally melted off her face like cheap wax held to a hot flame. The terrifying, crushing realization that this was no longer her show, that she was no longer the one pulling the strings, finally crashed down heavily on her shoulders. Liam grabbed the edge of the wooden podium, looking completely green, as if he were about to violently empty his stomach right there onto the red carpet. They had planned a devastating surprise attack, but they had foolishly walked directly into a heavily armed, fully prepared fortress. Marcus did not ask for permission. He did not say a single word. He simply hit the enter key on his keyboard. The giant screen illuminated the dark ballroom with a blinding, harsh white light. The very first slide was an incredibly clear, high-resolution, heavily zoomed photograph of Liam and Chloe kissing passionately next to a rusted green dumpster behind a cheap, rundown motel on the edge of the city limits. The digital timestamp glowing clearly on the bottom right corner read 3:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. A collective, massive, horrified gasp violently echoed through the entire room. Before they could even process the visual shock, Marcus clicked his mouse to the next slide. It was a perfectly scanned, high-definition copy of a joint credit card statement. A bright, glowing red circle highlighted a specific charge for $145 at that exact same pathetic motel. The next slide was infinitely worse. It was a massive, blown-up screenshot of their private text messages, magnified so large that even the people standing at the very back bar could read every single word. "I cannot wait until the bitch is finally gone," Chloe's text bubble read. "Just give me a few more months of pretending, baby. I need to secure the assets first," Liam had replied just 2 minutes later. Slide after slide, click after click, Marcus ruthlessly exposed every single filthy, pathetic detail of their 6-month-long affair. The audience was no longer in a state of quiet shock. The sympathetic pity they had felt for me just 3 minutes ago rapidly mutated into intense, burning, vocal disgust for the two people cowering on the stage. Wealthy women were covering their mouths in pure, unadulterated revulsion. Powerful men who regularly did high-level business with Liam were aggressively shaking their heads, visibly disgusted by his sheer stupidity, his utter lack of discretion, and his total lack of loyalty. I stood perfectly still and watched Marcus display the itemized receipts for the expensive, custom jewelry. Liam had bought Chloe using the exact money I had earned from designing commercial high-rises. I watched the screen flash a receipt for a $3,200 diamond bracelet, followed immediately by a photograph of Chloe wearing that exact same bracelet at a family barbecue just 2 weeks later. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, stolen directly from our shared life savings, proudly and undeniably projected in crisp high definition for the entire world to see. I briefly pulled my gaze away from the blinding light of the screen and looked straight down at the front row. My parents were sitting exactly where I had placed them earlier that evening, at the VIP table, right next to the stage stairs. My mother was clutching her expensive pearl necklace with both hands, her face completely drained of all color, her mouth hanging wide open in a silent, suffocating scream of horror. My father looked as though he had physically aged 15 years in the span of 5 minutes. His hands were shaking uncontrollably where they rested on the white tablecloth. They were staring up at their youngest daughter, the beautiful, chaotic golden child they had fiercely protected from every single consequence since she was born. The girl they had endlessly pampered, excused, and shielded from the real world. The horrible, undeniably brutal truth was reflecting right back into their eyes, from the glowing light of the giant projector screen. Their unconditional, blind indulgence had not raised a strong, independent woman. It had meticulously created a vicious, entitled, and soulless monster who was actively trying to destroy their eldest daughter. And as they sat there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the public humiliation, they finally realized there was absolutely nothing they could do to protect her this time. The bridge was completely engulfed in roaring flames, and I was going to make sure every single person in that room watched it burn all the way down to the very last ash. The visual bombardment finally broke Liam completely. His knees, trembling so violently they could no longer support his weight, simply gave out. He collapsed onto the carpeted stage right at my feet, the heavy thud of his body echoing through the microphone stand I still held in my hand. The sophisticated, confident man I had married was completely gone, replaced by a sobbing, pathetic shell desperately clawing at the hem of my emerald gown. "Hannah, please," he choked out, tears mixing with the thick layer of sweat on his pale face. "Please, you have to listen to me. It meant absolutely nothing. It was all her." He blindly threw his arm out, pointing a violently shaking finger at my sister. "She set me up. She seduced me when I was vulnerable. She trapped me. I swear to God, Hannah, I never wanted her. It was a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake." The sheer cowardice of his betrayal, tossing his supposedly beloved pregnant mistress completely under the bus the very second the tide turned against him, ignited an entirely new kind of chaos on the stage. "You pathetic, lying coward," Chloe screamed, her voice tearing out of her throat with an ugly, raspy edge. She lunged forward, swinging her hand violently toward his face, but Liam cowered, scrambling backward on his hands and knees like a frightened dog. She stood over him, her chest heaving heavily, her perfectly styled hair now a tangled, frizzy mess around her face. She looked absolutely unhinged. Realizing Liam had instantly abandoned her to save his own skin, Chloe spun around to face me. Her eyes were completely wild, bloodshot and frantic, searching desperately for any remaining weapon she could use to inflict pain. She found the one thing she genuinely thought made her invincible. She thrust her chin up, placing both hands protectively over her stomach, pulling her crimson dress tight to emphasize the slight curve of her body. "So what if you humiliate me in front of all these people?" she yelled, her voice vibrating with a desperate, hysterical triumph. "So what if you show them some cheap motel receipts? None of it actually changes the reality, Hannah. I am still carrying his flesh and blood. I am giving him a child, something a cold, selfish workaholic like you could never, ever give him. You can keep your fancy director title and your stupid money. He and I are bound together for the rest of our entire lives. And there is absolutely nothing your expensive private investigator can do to erase that fact." Her cruel words hung heavily in the air. The electric, unified outrage of the audience suddenly faltered. The atmosphere in the massive ballroom visibly sank. A heavy, intensely uncomfortable quiet washed over the crowd. I could see the expressions on the faces of the wealthy socialites shifting in real time. The burning disgust they held for Chloe was momentarily overshadowed by a deep, hesitant pity directed right at me. Because in their world, in any social circle, a child was an undeniable anchor. An affair was temporary. A scandal could eventually be forgotten with enough time and money. But a baby was a permanent, unbreakable tether. Chloe knew exactly how to twist the emotional knife, banking her entire survival on the biological reality that she had won the ultimate, irreversible victory. But instead of flinching, instead of crumbling under the crushing weight of her vicious declaration, I felt a deep, genuine wave of pity wash over me. I looked at my younger sister, standing there so defiantly, betting her entire existence on a hand she did not even realize was completely rigged. I smiled. It was not a smirk or an angry grimace, but a soft, terrifyingly calm smile of absolute, genuine pity. The kind of smile you give a bird right before it flies headfirst into a solid glass window. Chloe saw that smile, and the arrogant fire in her eyes instantly flickered out. She instinctively took a slow, trembling step backward, her hands sliding away from her stomach. Her primal instincts finally warned her that she was standing directly on a landmine, but it was far too late to run. I slowly turned my head away from her terrified face and looked back down the stage at Marcus. I gave him one final, definitive nod. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the suffocating silence of the room. "Please open the final folder, the one clearly labeled medical." Marcus clicked his mouse one final time. The giant screen flashed, replacing the sordid text messages and hotel receipts with a stark, blindingly white medical document. It bore the official blue letterhead of a premier urology clinic located right here in downtown Chicago. The date stamped clearly at the top was exactly 3 years and 4 months ago. Highlighted in a glaring, impossible-to-ignore strip of neon yellow was the final medical procedure code and a single definitive term: vasectomy. I turned to face my sister, whose smug, arrogant expression was currently disintegrating into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "You see, Chloe, you made a massive, fundamental miscalculation in your little hostile takeover," I explained calmly, watching the blood completely drain from her face until she looked like a ghost. "Liam never wanted children. We made that permanent decision together. Exactly 3 years and 4 months ago, I personally drove him to that clinic. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, I drove him home, and I handed him the bags of frozen peas for his recovery. He kept that procedure a tightly guarded secret from everyone else, so he could comfortably cheat on his business trips without ever having to worry about the messy, expensive consequences of an accidental pregnancy." A deafening collective gasp rolled through the massive ballroom. It was the sound of hundreds of people simultaneously putting the pieces together. Chloe stood absolutely paralyzed. Her hands, which had been resting so proudly and protectively on her stomach just seconds prior, fell lifelessly to her sides. Her lips parted, but absolutely no sound came out. She was trapped in the agonizing, suffocating realization that the very weapon she thought would guarantee her victory was actually the explosive device that was about to destroy her entirely. "But you are definitely pregnant, sister," I continued, my voice echoing like a final judgment over the stunned crowd. "I will give you full credit for that. When Liam kept delaying his promise to leave me, you panicked. You realized you needed a permanent anchor to force his hand and secure your comfortable future. You needed a baby. But since my husband was unknowingly shooting blanks, you had to find a willing donor to play the biological father." I shifted my gaze away from the brightly lit stage and looked directly out into the sea of shocked guests, specifically targeting table number 7 near the center of the room. Which brings us to Trevor, I said loudly, pointing my finger directly at Liam's sleazy, arrogant junior business partner. Trevor, who was sitting completely frozen next to his incredibly wealthy high society wife, suddenly looked as though he had been struck by a high-voltage current. The entire room pivoted to stare at him. Marcus is incredibly thorough, I told the silent crowd. While tracking Chloe, he documented her visiting Trevor's luxury apartment on 6 different occasions over the past 4 months, perfectly timed during the exact hours his lovely wife was busy hosting her charity board meetings. Chloe needed a quick pregnancy, and Trevor was more than happy to oblige. The ensuing explosion of chaos was instant and magnificent. At table number 7, Trevor's elegant wife stood up with terrifying mechanical precision. She picked up her crystal goblet filled to the brim with a very expensive dark red Cabernet. Without uttering a single word, she smoothly and forcefully splashed the entire glass directly into Trevor's terrified, sweating face. She dropped the empty crystal glass onto the white tablecloth, grabbed her designer clutch, and marched straight out of the ballroom, leaving him dripping wet and utterly humiliated in front of all his professional peers. Up on the stage, the final illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. Liam, who was still kneeling weakly on the carpet, slowly turned his head to look at Chloe. The desperate, pleading look in his eyes was instantly replaced by a deep, visceral, and absolute revulsion. He realized he had burned his beautiful marriage, his wealth, and his flawless reputation for a woman who was actively sleeping with his business partner right behind his back. "You disgusting, lying whore!" Liam spat at her, his voice trembling with sheer disgust and rage. That was the killing blow. Chloe's legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto her knees right next to the podium, her expensive crimson dress pooling around her like spilled blood. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a raw, guttural sob that echoed painfully through the microphone. In the span of 20 minutes, she had lost her secret lover, her backup plan, her dignity, and every single shred of her carefully constructed fantasy. She was utterly broken, surrounded entirely by the burning wreckage she had so eagerly set on fire. I looked down at the 2 pathetic figures cowering at my feet. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even the briefest flash of triumph. I was simply done. I reached down to my left hand and smoothly slid the heavy, custom-designed diamond wedding ring off my finger. I placed it gently onto the wooden podium. The heavy metal band made a soft, final clinking sound that resonated through the silent room. My lawyer delivered the fully finalized divorce papers to your legal team exactly at 5 o'clock this afternoon, Liam. I stated calmly into the microphone for the final time. Do not ever try to contact me again. I turned my back on them and slowly descended the stage stairs. As I walked down the center aisle, the crowd of wealthy elites parted for me with an air of profound respect. The absolute silence was suddenly broken by a slow, rhythmic sound. It started with 1 person near the back, then 3, then 10. A scattered, deeply respectful applause rippled through the ballroom as I passed. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the Drake Hotel and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air of the city, leaving the traitors locked inside the miserable, inescapable hell they had built with their own 2 hands. I walked down the brightly lit avenue, my head held high, breathing in the sweet, intoxicating scent of total freedom. Because the true value of a woman does not lie in her desperate ability to hold on to a weak, deceitful man. Her true value lies entirely in her quiet, ruthless strength and her absolute willingness to take out the trash when her house gets dirty. Thank you so much to all our wonderful listeners for tuning in and walking through this journey with me today. It has been a true pleasure sharing this story with you. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and empowering, please consider helping our team with a humble donation of just $1. You can support us by simply scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed and support their families, and it ensures we can continue bringing you even more thrilling stories in the future. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.